You know, when you hear the word budget, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably spreadsheets, right? Or maybe restrictions, a little bit of corporate dread. Well, today we're going to completely reframe that. We're going to see how a budget isn't just some boring accounting task, but actually a company's strategic roadmap to success. All right, let's dive in.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get into why a plan is the absolute bedrock of any successful company. Then, we're going to explore the 4 hidden powers of a good budget. After that, we'll peel back the layers of the budgeting pyramid, see how it all comes together, and even figure out who's in charge of building it. And finally, we'll learn how to sidestep those common pitfalls that can trip up even the best laid plan. So why does budgeting matter so much? Well, to really get that, let's first imagine an organization that has no unified plan. You've got every department with its own goals, and a lot of the time, those goals are in direct conflict with each other. It's basically organized chaos. This classic saying just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? Without a clear, quantified destination, a company's efforts just get scattered. They become inefficient. You can have different departments working incredibly hard, but they're all pulling in opposite directions. There's just no shared North Star to guide them.
Here's a perfect real-world example of what I'm talking about. Picture this. The sales team, they want a warehouse that is just overflowing with products, right? So they're ready for any customer demand. That makes perfect sense for hitting their targets. But then you have the treasury department, and they look at all that unsold product and just see cash sitting on a shelf, not doing anything. So both departments genuinely think they're doing what's best for the company, but without a central plan, they're just stuck. They're at a stalemate.
And this is exactly where the budget comes in to save the day. It is the solution to all that chaos. You see, it's not just one thing, it's this multifaceted tool that aligns the entire organization. It gives everybody that shared North Star we were just talking about. So, what is a budget, really? It's way more than just numbers on a page. Think of it as a realistic, quantitative roadmap for the future. And the keyword here is realistic. This is not about wishful thinking. It's all about creating a concrete, measurable plan that will actually get you where you want to go. So, first and foremost, a budget is an incredibly powerful planning tool. I mean, the very act of creating one forces managers to stop and think. They have to question their assumptions, they have to look ahead for potential roadblocks, and decide on a clear path forward before the problems even happen. It's about being proactive, not reactive. Second, it's a control tool. Once that plan is set, the budget acts as a benchmark, a yardstick. It establishes really clear guidelines for spending and lets the company measure its own performance. Are we using our resources efficiently? Are we on track? The budget holds the answers. Now, a budget isn't just about numbers. It's also about people. It can be a seriously powerful motivator. But here's the catch. If employees see it as some impossible target that they can never hit, it's going to backfire. Big time. To really inspire people, a budget has to feel achievable, and it needs to have a little bit of flexibility built in. And finally, the budget is a powerful communication tool. This solves the exact problem we talked about at the beginning. It translates those high-level company goals into concrete objectives for each department. Remember that standoff between the sales and treasury teams? The budget resolves it. It establishes a single company-wide inventory level that everyone can understand and work towards. Okay, so how does this all-important document actually get created? Well, it doesn't just appear out of thin air. It's the end result of a process that flows down from the very top of the organization, kind of like a pyramid. It all starts at the very peak of the pyramid with the mission statement, the company's why. This big idea is then translated into a strategic plan with ambitious, long-term goals. Something like become the market leader in 5 years. To make that happen, the company then sets short-term objectives that guide where resources go. And only then, at the very base of the pyramid, do individual departments create their detailed budgets. Each one is like a building block designed to support that grand vision at the top. So we've seen how a budget flows from the top down. But that brings up a really crucial question. Who actually gets to shape those final numbers? This is where the human element really comes into play, and you've basically got 2 very different schools of thought. So on one side, you've got top-down or authoritative budgeting. In this world, upper management sets the goals and pretty much just hands them down. On the other side, you have bottom-up or participative budgeting, and that's where the people on the ground, the middle and lower managers, have a ton of input in creating the very budget they're going to be held accountable for. As you can probably guess, there's a fundamental trade-off here.
The top-down approach is fast, it's efficient, and it definitely ensures consistency. But it can feel like a mandate from on high, which doesn't always inspire a lot of commitment. The bottom-up style, on the other hand, creates this really strong sense of ownership and often uses more accurate, on-the-ground info. The downside, well, it's a slower, more complicated process, and sometimes it can lead to some, let's just call them interesting behaviors.
So the crucial point really boils down to this. When a company is choosing its budgeting style, it's making a fundamental choice between top-down consistency and bottom-up commitment. And there's no single right answer here. It all depends on the company's culture and its goals. Now, that little mention of interesting behaviors in bottom-up budgeting leads us perfectly into our final section, the common traps that can completely undermine the entire process, and of course, how to avoid them. One of the absolute biggest traps, especially with participative budgeting, is something called budgetary slack. It's basically a fancy term for sandbagging. It's when a manager intentionally lowballs their revenue forecast or pads their expense budget just to make their targets incredibly easy to hit. All right, let's see if you've got it. A controller pads the budget to make the goals easier to meet. Is this an example of flexible budgeting, budgetary slack, zero-based budgeting, or budgetary variance? What do you think? And the answer is B, budgetary slack. Now look, it's a very human tendency to want to give yourself a bit of a cushion, but this practice can be really damaging. It distorts the reality of the business, and that makes the budget a much less accurate and far less useful tool for planning and control. So how do you build a process that avoids all these traps and actually works? Well, the most successful budgeting processes all share these key traits. First, top management has to be genuinely committed. You've got to have enough time to do it right. The goals need to be realistic, ideally with input from multiple levels. And this is a big one. The budget shouldn't be set in stone. It has to consider what-if scenarios and be updated as conditions on the ground change. And that really brings us right to the core takeaway of this entire explainer. A great budget is not a financial straitjacket. It is a living, breathing document. It's a dynamic guide that helps a company navigate all the inevitable twists and turns on the path toward achieving its most important goals. And that leaves us with one final thought. We've been talking about big corporations this whole time, that these principles, they're universal. So think about your own goals, personal or professional. How could applying these ideas of strategic planning, clear communication, and realistic motivation change the way you approach them?